Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the course Communication Theories 2. Today I will discuss with you a topic: comparative research on media effects. Along with the study of media use and its correlates, studies of media effects are another fundamental aspect of communication research. While the bulk of traditional media effect studies tries to identify why and how certain media use would produce observed effective, cognitive, and behavioral outcomes. Comparative studies of media effects tend to focus on their boundary conditions across different national contextual differences. When and in which contextual circumstances media effects occur, or in which context the presence of media effects would diminish, are central question in this area of research. This inclusion of context often takes the form of focusing on different opportunity structures represented by the contextual variations of the, for instance, media systems, press government relations, or the supply of certain types of media programming or contents across countries. On the one hand, and how such variations may in turn produce or further condition the effects of given media exposure on the outcome variables in questions. On the other hand, this is often achieved by the linking of traditional survey data across countries with the respective media content data. Sometimes on both the aggregate and on individual levels, any studies conceptualize media exposure or media use as moderating factors of other theoretically relevant variables such as political ideology, and explaining one's political conditions or attitudes in this classification. Given its theoretical focus of media consumptions, predicting a dependent variable of interest. A considerable portion of prior work on this topic has examined the impact of one's mass media use on political knowledge or political engagement, and how and why contextual variation across different national contexts can influence this link. These works are motivated, at least in part, by the observation that while media exposure in general is related to political learning and as a result to political engagements, it appears that the extent of such a relationship is highly variable across different geographical contexts, presumed contingent upon what is actually transmitted by different media. It therefore logically follows that any contextual variations in terms of linguistic norms, the degree of commercialization, or the sheer number of choices between news versus entertainment, all of which can systematically affect the content and frequency of news. Programming may affect the relationship between news media exposure and political knowledge, or you could say an engagement. Using 2019 European election study from the member states, that the higher the country level media fragmentation, the viewership share of the largest newspaper or TV news across different member states, the higher the knowledge gaps are between the top and bottom socio-economic quartiles. This approach is directly echoed in research, where they found the more saturated like the level of cross media diffusion of the same information across different media environment additionality moderate the impact of one's motivation on political learning from media exposure. This moderating relationship doesn't appear to be strictly monotonic. Like in 2014, there is a researcher, his name is Linger, also found that the availability of more hard news oriented news sources like public broadcasting and broadsheet newspapers increase the impact of weekly media exposure on a citizens' level of political knowledge, focusing on institutional factors across 31 countries around the globe. The less governments interfere in media environments, the higher the levels of citizens. Political knowledge is a function of personal educational attainments. This was the hypothesis of his research. Similarly, in 2014, there is another scholar, his name is Clark. He observed that the more media coverage of European politics at the national level increases, citizens' knowledge and EU related issues, thus the confirming the expectation that variations of information availability or opportunity significantly shape personal knowledge above and beyond any individual level predictors of political knowledge. The European elections have been described as a natural playground for comparative research and a laboratory for comparative social sciences, in particular for electoral research. The fact that the same event takes place at the same time and at regular intervals as of 2004. More than 24 different political and media systems makes a systematic engagement with the interplay of contextual and individual level effects possible and necessary. Given that European election studies have been conducted ever since the 1999 election, which is including a comprehensive battery of media use questions, and given that these surveys have been supplemented in some years by large scale content analysis of media coverage in national newspaper and television, important insights have been generated regarding the effects of media use and their conditionalities. Some contributions in this area examine the interplay between characteristics of the national information environment and individual exposure to explain types of media contents, relying on a linkage approach. Regarding the effect of media on political engagement and voting behavior of people, it provides a fairly comprehensive and innovative strategy to model contextual variations in the effect of media exposure on individuals' voting behavior. Combining a scale or a large scale media content analysis of a sample of national news media across 27 member states, with the representative panel surveys conducted in each country. They show that the level of conflict framing in media coverage of campaign news significantly varies across countries, and more importantly, the effect of conflict framing exposure on voter turnout significantly depends on EU polity evaluation and in a given country, like the tone toward the adopted in the national media as a whole. Public satisfaction with democracy was influenced by individual exposure to positive news about the democratic function of the EU, and this effect was found to be stronger in countries in which there was a dominantly positive message flow about. So, individual media exposure and the country information environment reinforced each other's. Studies have also looked beyond the distribution of political knowledge and patterns of voting behavior across different contexts. Based on the seminal work of Jamieson and Capilla in 1997, which argues in favor of relationships between strategies framing in the news and political cynicisms among the public. This effect likely depends on the functioning of a country's political system. They argue that the citizens' level of cynicism towards a European Parliament election campaign is shaped by both individual level and contextual level factors. They found that exposure to strategic, game framed news, like news articles depicting politics as a strategic games among political actors, it decreased political cynicism among the more politically engaged. But at the same time, they also found that exposure to strategic, game framed news significantly increased cynicism towards EP elections, especially within political context that are characterized by high levels of democratization and higher quality governance. Yet another study drawing on a European election data, which was carried out by Wilson and Hobolt in 2004, they examined the citizens' attribution of responsibility between national-wise and EU wide governmental bodies using the 2009 European election study. They surveyed voters coupled with the EES media study and their own expert survey. They found that while political knowledge is positively correlated with the correct attribution of responsibility, which is measured as the discrepancies between citizens' attribution and experts' opinions regarding certain issues. A negative media tone and party polarizations, which represents the uh, politics of different topics, therefore opportunities for learning about such issues, increases the correct allocation of responsibility over national political actors. This set of studies drawing is it does on data collection in the framework of the 2009 European elections. It demonstrates the importance of relying on multiple data sources beyond the survey. Lastly, a novel and promising aspects in the comparative communication literature is the conduct of identical experiments at the same time in different national context, taking such as the Hamlers in 2018. He investigated that the effects of populist communication messages on political engagement, and he found that in a particular enlightenment cues and populist messages led to the greater engagement in those countries in which the unemployment rate was high, while investment in and coordination of such comparative experimental design are demanding, including the proper specification of stimulus material. They may be important avenues to move forward in terms of the general of the causal structures demonstrated by the experimentations. There were different challenges ahead for them, like the communication and particular explanations and consequences of media use should be studied in conjunctions between micro level processes and macro level influences. While this was already acknowledged by communication scholars, a systematic and statistical engagement with the interplay between these different levels of influence based on large study design is still only a marginal phenomena in the literature, as described by a review of the state of the art. While the insights they have been generated offer some degree of theoretical convergence and hence important insights into theorizing of communication processes, much work remains to be done. In what follows, we first discuss the generated empirical insights in a wider context, followed by a critical assessments of the state of the art. We can then conclude by highlighting the challenges faced by the comparative study of media use and media effects and how the field could move forward. A general conclusion from the findings sketched by above is that the context does indeed matter. It either structures individual cognitions, the attitudes and behaviors directly in a predictable way, or uh, uh, it further illuminates the boundary conditions of individual influence processes. In particular, the literature on antecedents and the consequences of media use, especially for political learning, consistently highlights the role played by the media systems. I think that's enough for today. Thank you so much for watching my video lecture.